Every single relic and tier has been revealed for the upcoming leagues, which means it's finally time to make our picks. In this video, I'm going to cover every single relic one tier at a time. I'll tell you my pick, and I'll be throwing every relic on a tier list. I'll let you know which ones I think are decent alternatives, and which relics I would personally avoid at all costs. By the end of this video, you'll see every single one of my final relic choices for Leagues Catalyst, and hopefully you'll also have a good idea which relics you may want to pick as well to best suit your playstyle. So without further ado, let's get it started. In Tier 1, we've got three options: Excavator, Divine Woodcutter, and Animal Wrangler. For starters, let's look at Animal Wrangler. This grants a powerful harpoon for both fishing and hunter, and while training fishing, the tool will also make it so that you do not need bait when you're fishing, and you get a 50% increased catch rate. On top of that, any fish you catch is automatically sent to the bank, and you can toggle the fish being automatically cooked too. So for fishing, this thing is extremely good. But when you really look at what this offers, it's not that big of a deal, because in Runescape 3, the place where you're going to do most of your fishing is in the deep sea fishing hub, where there are banks literally scattered everywhere. So as much as it might be convenient or a little more AFK to be able to sit in one spot, it is literally a 5-second walk to the bank, basically universally wherever you are. So overall, I don't think that's terribly good, but I will say a 50% increased catch rate for all fish is extremely potent and very beneficial. The only thing is, this is only going to be beneficial if you're someone that is going to be using a lot of food when you're PVMing. And if later on you choose the Barbarianism relic, you're going to get lifesteal anyway, so you may not need nearly as much or just about any food whatsoever. If you're using Necromancy, you're going to have a ghost that should have all of your heals handled. So really my main issue with this relic is I don't think food is actually going to be all that sought after or all that valuable in this league. And the one point that it would be really good is early game, except early game, the best way to get food is either buying wine from Fortunato in Draenor Village, or you can steal from a cake stall, or buy gnome food from the gnome food shop. It heals an absolute ton of life points, and it is more than good enough to power you all the way through the early and the mid game. But Animal Wrangler also has a number of effects for Hunter. For starters, while training Hunter, traps are never going to fail, all Hunter loot is automatically sent to the bank, and you also get double loot, and this does also apply to things like Big Game Hunter. To me, this is almost completely useless, because if you take a look at our skill training guide here, the best way to train Hunter universally at every single level is Whirligigs and Het's Oasis. And Whirligigs already drop loot that is stackable, so noting it makes no difference, and it also drops loot that isn't terribly sought after either, so giving you double loot kind of doesn't really make a terribly big difference. On top of that, when you're hunting Whirligigs and Het's Oasis, you're also not using traps, so traps never failing also does just about absolutely nothing. One other really important mention with relation to the Animal Wrangler relic is that the ability to cook fish while you're fishing automatically already exists in RuneScape, and it exists through an archaeology relic called Bait and Switch. So if you were to train archaeology very quickly, you could already unlock the ability to do this without having to use one of your precious relic choices on Animal Wrangler. And because of that, I'm going to be throwing Animal Wrangler in the D tier. I think the hunter benefits are basically nothing, and the fishing benefit, it just isn't really doing it for me. It's not nearly enough to move the needle. But with that said, let's keep looking at our first tier and talk about Divine Woodcutter. Divine Woodcutter grants a powerful hatchet for both woodcutting and divination. This does two things. First off, logs can be automatically burnt, as well as unburnt logs and birds' nests being sent automatically to the bank. This is not terribly useful for a couple reasons. The first reason it's pretty much meaningless is there is already a way to do this, once again via archaeology. It is a relic power called Always Adds, and it literally does exactly that. Whenever you chop a log, you can choose to turn it on and automatically burn said log. Being able to send your logs to the bank automatically is also pretty much useless, because in RuneScape 3, there's an item called a wood box, and it stores literal hundreds of logs. On top of this, most of the woodcutting spots in the game are very close to a bank already, so this is basically worthless. But let's go look at the divination benefits. For starters, memories are automatically deposited directly into the rift. This is basically a time save if you were training divination traditionally by training at a rift. But unfortunately, you don't train divination this way at literally any level bracket. You can either 1 to 99 via caches, or you could do Dungeoneering, Divination, or Hall of Memories, and none of these are trained at a rift. So basically, Divine Woodcutter, this benefit is completely useless. Chronicles are only captured when you're training at a rift, which once again, you're unlikely to be doing. And the same with the energy springs lasting longer and gaining double divine energy. Not only does this only boost training methods that you should absolutely never do under any circumstance, but you might be thinking double energy sounds pretty good or sounds like it could be helpful. Well, later on, when we talk about the Perkfection relic, relic, this makes it so that augmented items and machines consume no divine charge. So as long as you pick Perkfection later on, you literally don't need energy to begin with. And for that reason, I personally think Divine Woodcutter might be the worst relic of the entire bunch, and I'm going to be putting it in F tier. And if I could put a shelf underneath the tier list that was below F tier, I would put it there. I think this is an absolute trap of a pick, and it is significantly worse than other options. But what about Excavator? Excavator grants a powerful tool for both mining and archaeology that counts both as a pickaxe and a mattock. When training mining with the tool equipped, ores are automatically smelted into bars, and gems are instantly cut. On top of that, resources are automatically sent to the bank, and you get double damage during raw opportunities. These mining benefits are absolutely sick. Not only does this make smithing significantly easier to train because you don't need to bank or smelt your own bars, but instantly cutting gems is huge because the best way to train crafting in the early game until likely level 75 and possibly even beyond is cutting uncommon gems that you mine from uncommon gem rocks. But if you pick Excavator, you won't even need to cut them at all. All you'll have to do is mine. They'll be automatically cut and automatically be sent to the bank for future use. When training archaeology with this tool equipped, you're going to gain increased chronotes. And if you're wondering what chronotes are, they're the currency that allows you to buy things like the archaeology outfit and a number of different buffs, and it's also the currency that is used when you're swapping your archaeology relic picks. I know, it's a little confusing because it uses the exact same name, but archaeology's power-ups are also called relics. Outside of that, the material costs to restore artifacts are halved, and this is absolutely huge because that's the main way you're going to gain XP in archaeology. The first step in the archaeology training process is this, where you're actually excavating remains from the ground. But at that point, once you've pulled your artifact, the way that you actually gain the majority of your XP is running over to these archaeology workbenches and actually restoring the thing that you just pulled out of the ground. And this requires materials. As an Iron Man, materials are always going to be your limiting factor, so effectively, making every single restoration cost half the amount of materials basically doubles your experience gain. This is an absolutely massive boost to archaeology training, and it's going to make it so that you have a significantly faster and easier time. But we're not even done yet, because on top of that, we also have time sprites being stationary. This is extremely cool, because when you're training archaeology, as you can see here, there's a little sprite above this node, and generally how it works is you have to constantly chase it around to get the maximum rates and to pull your excavations as quickly as possible. But you'll see every few seconds that this thing is going to jump around between the different excavation spots. So archaeology is, while sort of AFK, also a little bit active too. But with the time sprite never moving, this guarantees that you're always going to get maximum XP rates even if you are fully AFKing. Because instead of having to continually follow the time sprite around every time it moves, it's just going to be locked onto your character the entire time. So this thing that I'm doing right here, where I'm having to pay attention and move over, you won't have to do that at all. The last buff to archaeology is that geodes have a chance of containing archaeology materials, and this is also extremely nice because you can never have enough archaeology materials, especially on an Iron Man, and geodes are something you're going to get automatically whenever you're training mining. So now, if you train mining as a means to train both smithing and crafting for invention, you're also going to give yourself a huge head start on archaeology too. So for me, if we head on over to the tier list, in my opinion, the Excavator Relic is an absolute instant pick. This is an extremely strong relic, and it absolutely bodies all of the other options for tier 1. Excavator is so much stronger than the other relics in this tier that even if Animal Wrangler and Divine Woodcutter were bunched together to be one relic that combined both, I would take Excavator 100 times out of 100. Excavator is the absolute best pick of the bunch. With tier 1 out of the way, let's take a look at tier 2. The first relic is called Golden Footed, and it grants a pair of boots that ensure a sure-footed approach to agility. What they're going to do is these boots are going to grant you agility experience periodically whenever you're running, and this is going to happen every 6 seconds. Also happens when you're skilling or using ultimate abilities. The main benefit of Golden Footed is if you absolutely despise agility, you're not a fan of the skill, this is going to be a very eloquent way of skilling and training it without actually having to actively do any kind of agility. So agility haters, this one's for you. On top of that though, they are called Golden Hawk boots because upon completing a lap, you're also going to get 1,000 coins per agility level you have. So as an example, if you're 99 agility and you complete a lap of the Birthorpe agility course, that should get you 99,000 coins. This is also going to double your agility XP, so if you're actively training agility, it's a decent way to get some GP, and it's also going to be a great way to get XP as well. And then last but not least, you will not be able to fail any agility courses or obstacles. Golden Footed is a really interesting pick because if you really dislike agility, I can't say it's a terrible option. But I am going to say that I don't think this GP benefit is terribly useful at all. Even though shop stocks are going to be infinite for this league and there are going to be lots of uses for GP, in RS3 there are a couple really good ways to get money early on, and one of them is just collecting quest shop dice every multiple of 25 quest points you get. Because a number of quests are automatically completed, you should be able to log into leagues and then immediately claim a free 250,000 gold instantly, just like that. And as soon as you get to every multiple of 25 quest points, that's another massive chunk of change that starts at 250k and actually goes up over time depending on how many quest points you get. But on top of that, there's something called Wilderness Flash events that are going to be available in the league. And although they are personally one of my least favorite activities in the game, they are extremely overpowered for GP. Basically, they happen every hour in the wilderness. When you do them, you get a whole bunch of experience and you get a looting bag that is full of a lot of coins. And these don't scale to your total level. So as long as you get the minimum contribution, you can make 500,000 or even upwards of a few million coins every hour, basically passively by playing this D&D over and over again. So Golden Footed is not terribly competitive for GP. But what about for experience? Well, it is very true that agility is one of the more annoying skills to train in RuneScape. I mean, in levels 1 to 30, you're literally meant to jump the bridge outside the nature grotto like your Swampletics. Like, this is not a terribly fast skill, but you also need to remember that because this is leagues, your progression is going to be massively accelerated. Getting to tier 2 of this league is going to take probably less than half an hour to do, and then immediately you're going to be at a 6x experience multiplier. One other thing I was going to mention about agility is if you really hate actively training agility, fortunately, as soon as you are level 65, you can actually AFK these manual auto cycles in the empty throne room by the Archaeology Guild. And this should take you all the way from 65 to 85, or with Leagues XP 90 plus, and you literally don't even have to move. You could just sit on the bikes and completely AFK it. The XP rate isn't great, but if you're an agility hater, I would much rather advise doing this than picking the Golden Hawk boots and giving up the opportunity to take one of two other interesting relics. I'm going to be throwing Golden Footed in the C tier. I don't think it's an absolute trap of a choice, but I think there are better options. Next up, let's talk about 5-Finger Discount. This is a really simple one. This is basically a thieving-specific relic. It's going to make it so you never fail a thieving check, it's going to note all of your thieving loot, and it's also going to make stealing from stalls not deplete whatsoever, and reduce the safe cracking cooldown to 1 minute. This is a very strong relic for thieving in particular, as basically what it's going to do is it is going to make your training completely AFK the entire way up. Anything you click on, you're going to auto pickpocket, all of your loot's going to be noted, and if you want to train actively later on with safe cracking, the XP rates you're going to be able to get are absolutely ridiculous. But here's the thing about auto pickpocketing in RuneScape 3. It already exists, and you could already do it from level 1. You will still fail thieving checks occasionally, and you'll see that I could get stopped at any moment and I'll have to re-click. But as long as you're paying some amount of attention or listening, auto pickpocketing already exists. It will be a little bit slower by default, but what you can also do is activate the archaeology relic called Sticky Fingers, and then you're going to get competitive, fast-paced auto pickpocketing without having to waste one of your relic choices. Thieving is already known as one of the more AFK and one of the fastest and easiest skills to max in RuneScape 3, so to me, picking a relic specifically to help you level one of the easiest skills in the entire game feels like a little bit of a waste to me. And that is why, when we head on over the tier list, I'm going to be throwing 5-Finger Discount in the D tier. I don't think it's a terribly good choice, although if you're someone that just really wants to AFK for the entirety of the beginning of the league, let's say like you've got a crazy work week on the first week, I think it's a viable pick, specifically if you want to just get 200 mil thieving without having to put any effort in early on. Now let's look at Farming Frenzy. Farming Frenzy offers a range of benefits to nurture your farming skills. First off, patches are harvested instantly and products are automatically noted. Seeds planted instantly grow to full, you get a 15% chance of increased crop yield, all patches are automatically treated with Ultra Compost, you have a 20% chance of saving planted seeds when sowing, and then most importantly, you will plant max herbs using a single seed. This is an absolutely huge buff, and this is completely ridiculous for farming. It's worth noting in leagues that you're already going to have a 5x increased growth rate for farming, so if you're someone that likes doing farm runs, you could basically do them constantly and pretty well loop your herb runs and your tree runs, and you could get 99 farming that way. One of the biggest bottlenecks as an Iron Man in RuneScape is making potions for PVMing. It is a completely ridiculous process, and just to illustrate that, I'm going to show you what it takes to make a single overload in RS3. This is actually out of date, so this actually requires more potions than just this, but this is what goes into one singular overload in RuneScape 3. You need an absolute ton of all of the herbs as well as a ton of secondaries, and it is an absolute pain to do. This is probably one of my biggest gripes as an Iron Man. It's a frustrating process. It takes a lot of time, and it also takes a lot of planning. Now, It's worth noting that in this league, because shop stock is infinite, you'll be able to buy as many super potions as you need from Mazcab, so you can check off some of these things from the list. One other thing that makes this process even worse as an RS3 Iron Man is that every single herb drop was removed from every boss drop table, and instead of dropping herbs, they drop seeds, so you actually need to farm seeds no matter what if you want to make overloads. It's kind of an insane process, and I personally think it was way easier when you could just kill bosses for your herbs. But with that said, in RS3, alongside that update, something else happened too, which is that you can now plant 1, 2, 4, 7, or 10 seeds at a time for different herb yields. This final effect on Farming Frenzy is that if you plant a single seed, it is going to act as though you planted 10 seeds. So you're going to be getting significantly more herbs all the time. And not only that, but your yields are going to be noted and grow instantly. So this takes farming from something that you're going to have to constantly monitor and think about if you ever want to have a dream of having overloads during this league, to something that you can just passively gain seeds from doing Miscellanea or from Slayer or from bosses. And then whenever you want to make a shipment of potions, it's going to be as easy as picking any farming spot, hanging out here for a little bit, and you'll get all of the herbs you need instantaneously without requiring that many seeds. And that is why Farming Frenzy is going to be my pick for tier 2, and I think it is significantly better than the other options. It's not an S tier like Excavator that really sets up your account for a ton of success, but as someone that's played Iron Man and Hardcore Iron Man for a long time, not having to worry about herb runs, especially in the early and the mid game, is extremely beneficial, and I'm going to be throwing Farming Frenzy comfortably in the A tier. I did also want to mention, though, that as a tier 7 passive buff, the advanced time spell can be cast without limit. And what this means is you could use the advanced time spell to automatically skip growth ticks for your farming. So if you're worried about how to get farming up or get farming to 200 mil, it's going to be extremely easy once you're tier 7. But if you're anything like me, I want to be PVMing once I'm in tier 4 and in tier 5, well before I have enough points for tier 7. So I would much rather have an easy way to make overloads and train my farming before that point. I will also mention that the advanced time spell does not work for ultra growing herbs, so you would still have to wait the timer for herbs. But for training and for growing animals and player-owned farms, which is one of the best ways to train farming in RS3, this is a really, really solid option. With that said though, Farming Frenzy is my pick, and now let's head in to tier 3. Tier 3 is the teleport tier in the league, and you have one of 3 options. You could choose Fairy's Flight, Assassin's Insight, or Voidwalker. Fairy's Flight is extremely good specifically for someone that wants to be doing farm runs, as it provides the perfect magical support for any avid farmers. Basically, this is going to give you a fairy mushroom that allows you to teleport to any fairy ring, spirit tree, or farming patch in RuneScape. So if you click on it here, you see an absolute ton of options, and this will be your one-stop shop for farm runs. But this isn't terribly good as long as you pick Farming Frenzy before this, because if you take Farming Frenzy before this, you don't need to do farm runs or travel between patches. If everything instantly grows, you could just pick one patch and use that the entire time. This also auto-completes the Tree Gnome Village quest, which is nice, but Tree Gnome Village is actually a pretty good early game quest for combat XP, and I actually think it's one of the few quests that I would actually rather do than not do at all, purely because of the XP rewards being a really good jumpstart to my melee training. Because of this, I'm going to be throwing Fairy's Flight into the D tier. I don't think it's a terribly good pick, especially if you're comfortable with the farming pick on tier 2. But what about Assassin's Insight? This provides a teleport to all major Slayer targets, and it also grants the Skull of Slaying that allows you to teleport to any Slayer Master, dungeon, and a number of Slayer monsters. In the video for the Relic reveal, they scrolled through all of the options, and this is by far the most robust teleport of them all. It is extremely convenient, and it also mostly focuses on areas that are kind of hard to get to, like the depths of a Slayer training dungeon, and because of that, I actually think this is a solid teleport pick, and even though movement isn't nearly as valuable in RuneScape 3 as it is in old school RuneScape, I still think this is a really solid pick to get you some pretty good coverage to get you around the map. It's also worth noting that Assassin's Insight doesn't auto-unlock all of the pieces of content here. So as an example, even though Tormented Demons would be really awesome to be able to skip to, because then you could skip the Wild Gothic Sleep quest, unfortunately, it will not be unlocked until you complete the requisite quests. So this doesn't allow you to skip a whole lot of content, but once you've got it unlocked, it gives you a great way to get back to it. I also notice here that Morvan appears to be available on this account, and that's a really good sign, as Morvan is located in Prifddinas, and that might be a really nice, easy way to initially get to Prifddinas for the first time as soon as you hit tier 3. For me, Assassin's Insight is going to go in the B tier. I just don't think teleports are that valuable in RS3, but of the teleport relics so far, I think this provides a lot more solid coverage than the farming one. This gives you an item that already exists in RuneScape 3 called the Passage of the Abyss. This is an item that allows you to store teleports from all of the other kind of traditional teleport items in RuneScape in one place. So it's like an Amulet of Glory, a Dig Site Pendant, a Games Necklace, a Ring of Dueling, all of the kind of classic RuneScape teleports, and it combines them all in one. And this is something that you can make in the live game, and it's very easy to upkeep as well. But this is going to give you on tier 3 a fully permanently filled out one. So it's basically going to give you all of the classic teleports without having to put any thought into crafting them yourself. To me, this one isn't nearly as good because when I'm locking into a relic choice and I want to make a decision that is permanent and irreversible, I'm going to try to pick things that I'm not going to gain access to later on regardless. It'd kind of be like if the Assassin's Insight teleport only let you teleport to Slayer Masters. Well, that's something that the 99 Slayer Cape already does, so I probably wouldn't like this pick. The same can be said about Voidwalker. The Passage of the Abyss is an item that you can already make via the Invention skill, and as you'll find later on, there's also an Invention relic that is a pretty solid option. So to me, I actually don't think Voidwalker is a terribly good choice, and I'm going to be throwing it alongside Fairy's Flight in the D tier. As much as it is nice and convenient to not have to worry about making teleports to certain places, it doesn't really take you anywhere out of the ordinary, and it's something that you can get without having to lock yourself into this choice. And as you could probably tell by looking at the tier list, my pick for tier 3 is going to be Assassin's Insight. Next up, let's look at our tier 4 relics with Production Master, Rejuvenated, and Clue Connoisseur. We're going to start off by talking about Rejuvenated. This allows you to pick a different relic from tier 1, 2, or 3 instead of tier 4. So if we go back down to our handy relic picker, you're going to see here that this would allow you to make an additional choice. So if you were to pick Rejuvenated, you could then go back and grab Golden Footed, or Five Finger Discount, or Divine Woodcutter, or Animal Wrangler. To me, this is not a particularly interesting relic, and I also don't think it's that good either, because if we look over at the tier list, there's a pretty wide discrepancy between our picks, which are in S tier, A tier, and B tier in my opinion, and then everything else that is in C, D, or F tier. And because of that, I don't really think Rejuvenated is a terribly good choice, especially compared to the other relics in the same tier that we're going to talk about in just a second. Because of that, I'm actually going to be throwing Rejuvenated in the F tier. It is a significant downgrade to pick one of the lower tier, less powerful relics compared to what's offered here in tier 4. Next up, we are going to look at Clue Connoisseur. Optimize your clue solving with this selection of time savers. This is going to unlock the full Globetrotter outfit. This outfit in RuneScape 3 requires a ton of clue scrolling without the outfit to unlock it, as you unlock it with clue scroll points. So getting it instantly is a massive time save and a huge quality of life. But on top of that, any clue scroll you complete, you're going to receive an extra casket. And then on top of that, you're going to receive bonus sleep when you're opening clue scrolls, and whenever you start a new clue, you're going to get the minimum number of steps. On paper, this doesn't sound that good unless you know what the Globetrotter outfit does, because it is absolutely insane. Because it has infinite charges, this effectively allows you to make clue scrolls into something that is really not clue scrolls at all. Because one of the pieces of the Globetrotter outfit just lets you teleport to the location of your next step. Another piece of the Globetrotter outfit also allows you to reroll any step that you don't like. So let's say I open up a master clue, I got a puzzle that I didn't feel like doing, or maybe I got a costume that I didn't want to do. What I could do is I could just re-roll it until I got a step that I could just immediately teleport to and complete. So basically, if you like clue scrolls, this is actually not a good relic to pick, because I would assume if you like clue scrolls, you probably like navigating the world and going to the locations and completing the puzzles. And with this, you're basically going to be able to skip just about everything clue related, and completing clues is going to be an absolute breeze. I think this is an extremely strong relic, and it's worth noting when you're looking at Leagues points as well, that a ton of the Leagues tasks are clue scroll related. So for me personally, as someone that really doesn't like doing clue scrolls on an Iron Man, this is a really solid option, and it's a very powerful relic. It's going to allow you to get all of those Leagues points for completing clues without having to invest in nearly as much time or effort. Because of that, I'm going to throw Clue Connoisseur into the A tier. I think it's a really, really solid pick. But what about Production Master? This is one that you may be familiar with if you're an old school player. Production Master will make various activities process their items at once. The example given in the video was cutting a full inventory of gems all at the same time. You'll also never burn food accidentally, which is very funny wording, because I would assume that means if you were to cook something that was already cooked, it would probably still burn. On top of that though, you'll also get infinite urns. If you're wondering what urns do, they're worth about a 20% increase to your experience. So this is very significant, although you will already be on very boosted XP rates, but yeah, this is really, really nice to get infinite urns, and it means you don't need to make them yourself. You're also gonna gain portable skilling station benefits, which I think is really funny, because in the live game, it's like an MTX item kind of, but effectively, basically, they give you a little bit of extra experience and also have a chance to save some materials. While wearing the Brooch of the Elder Gods, you're also going to be able to spawn Saren Spirits, Divine Blessings, and Catalysts of Alteration. These are all fairly useful for different reasons. Catalysts of Alteration will give you clue scrolls, Divine Blessings are going to give you some components for invention, and then Saren Spirits give you access to the rare drop table periodically and can have some nice supplies. And the last real benefit of Production Master is you get a +6 stat boost to mining, herblore, cooking, crafting, fletching, and construction. And usually in RuneScape 3, if you wanted to mimic kind of a fraction of this power, you could do the Evil Dave's Big Day Out quest to get a spicy stew that would give you a +5 boost in these respective skills. So it's one better than a spicy stew permanently. Production Master on paper sounds incredibly good. It sounds absolutely ridiculous. But my concern with it is that it's likely made to work specifically by skilling via the Make X interface. So as an example, something like cutting gems leans really nicely into Production Master. But unlike an old school RuneScape where a lot of your skills are trained kind of the same way in the bank, in RuneScape 3, a lot of our skills use a different system, and it's like a progression system on an item. Because the greatest benefit of Production Master is the ability to cut and process materials immediately whenever they use that kind of Make X interface, what I wanted to do is go over the skill guide here, go over every skill in RuneScape, and just cover which skills this will actually work on. Because a lot of skills in RuneScape 3 have kind of moved on to different systems that are more progression-based. A good example of this is smithing, where in old school, this would absolutely work, but in RS3, it likely won't, because instead of producing like an inventive adamant kite shields, you actually have a progression system where you spend a significant amount of time reheating and working on smithing a singular piece of gear. It won't work for thieving, it won't work for woodcutting, it won't work for strength, it won't work for runecrafting, it won't work for necromancy, it won't work for ranging, it won't work for mining, it won't work for hunter, it won't work for magic, it won't work for prayer, it won't work for slayer, it won't work for summoning. It probably will work for herblore though, which is an absolutely massive one, because herblore is one of the skills that a lot of people do not like training, and as I mentioned earlier in this video, you're gonna have a lot of herblore to do if you want some overloads. This is likely not gonna work with fire making, divination, attack, archaeology, agility, constitution, construction, as you now train that in Fort Froome 3, defense, farming, fishing, dungeoneering. So ultimately, when you read the description, you might be thinking, wow, this sounds extremely good. But when you look at which skills this actually works on and benefits, it is a much shorter list than you would imagine. This will work for some of the crafting you'll be doing, although I will mention here that as soon as you unlock tier 4, as well as the Gate of Olympus boss, that will become your best method of training crafting, and it will not work on that. So basically, it does work on crafting, but it probably won't be optimal at any point. This should also work on some forms of fletching, but according to old school people, this did not work on everything. One of the best ways to train fletching in RS3 is making broad arrows, especially since shop stock is infinite. So you could just buy an infinite amount of broad arrow tips. You will have to make the arrow shafts yourself, but the actual making of the broads, people are suspecting, will not work. Outside of that, this should work for some invention training, and then, as we mentioned before, this will absolutely work and speed up the herblore training process by an absolute ton. One last skill to mention there is cooking too. So this is very good, but it doesn't work for a lot of the skills that you may need a pathway to train. To me, I'm happy training fletching with a massively boosted XP rate, knowing that I can infinitely buy the broad arrowheads. Cooking as well is a skill that is pretty easy to train, and it's not one that I would consider particularly difficult or important. On the herblore side, this is a very solid boost, but the thing that takes the most time when you're training herblore is actually the time it takes to gather the herbs themselves. The actual putting of the potions together, it's not too bad of a process comparatively. All of that is just to illustrate that while Production Master is really good, I don't think it's quite as good as it is in old school. It's going to help for a lot of skills, but a lot of the skills it helps with are relatively simple. So for me, I'm actually going to throw Production Master at the top of the B tier. I think it is a very solid option, and I could very much see why someone would pick it. But for me personally, as someone that does not enjoy doing clue scrolls, I'm actually going to be going with Clue Connoisseur so that I can get all of those bonus points from tier 4 to speedrun me towards tier 5. I never thought I would be leaving Production Master off the list, but I actually just don't think it's that good in RuneScape 3, and I've seen some people overrating it just a little bit. Whereas Clue Connoisseur, knowing how many points are tied up in clue scrolls, this is a really solid bet. Next up, we're heading in to tier 5, where we've got 4 relics to choose from, 1 for each combat style. I want to mention here that for all 4 combat style relics, these first 3 effects apply to all of them. So that's going to be double adrenaline, reduction in cooldowns and special attacks, as well as 100% hit chance. So you won't need to worry about splashing whatsoever. This applies to all of the combat style specific relics, but I did want to mention some interesting tech that you could use to take advantage of this. RuneScape 3 runs off of a damage potential system, which basically means the damage you deal is actually tied to your accuracy as well. So basically, in the live game, you would basically never want to be, say, meleeing in full magic gear, because your hit chance would be terrible, and because of that, the damage you would deal would also be terrible. But if you pick one of these combat style specific relics, this should unlock a lot of really fun, slightly cursed tech, where as an example, you could melee with 100% damage potential in full magic gear, and that might be a really fun, interesting option to make sure that your tanking is very solid. I will also mention that if you're wearing full magic gear while you're also meleeing, you would lose out on about 10% of your total damage that you would have had if you were wearing like melee power gear with strength bonus, but strength bonus and power gear isn't terribly useful until the late game. So for the early and the mid game, this could unironically be the play and something that you may want to consider doing. Just don't limit yourself just to the armor of the combat style you pick, because you might have access to some other really interesting options specifically for tanking. With that said, let's talk about Barbarism specifically. It does 3 things. First thing it does is your melee weapon attack range is increased by 1. This is really cool. One of the biggest issues with melee is that you end up having to run an MD just about everything. Can make it really, really difficult, especially for evading mechanics, and it can make melee feel a little bit bad at some bosses, so this should alleviate that just a little bit. On top of that, melee base damage is increased by 500. We did the math on this because we actually didn't believe how ridiculously good it is, and if you watched my previous video on the combat relics, this is very strong. This equates to approximately a 30 tier boost to your damage, which is completely ridiculous. It basically means a dragon halberd will be equivalent in damage to that of a noxious scythe. So basically, if you pick Barbarism, you should be able to have no issues whatsoever meleeing just about anything in the game, even if your gear is limited to tier 60 or 70. You could unironically run a melee Zuck cape with like a rune halberd with this setup. It is that busted, and this is by far the strongest combat style specific buff of all of them by a long shot. But we're not even done yet, because you also get a 10% lifesteal from the melee damage that you're dealing. And if this isn't capped, which it doesn't seem like it is, that is also completely ridiculous, and that should completely negate the need for food whatsoever. Because of these 2 buffs, Barbarism is a very strong option. Not only is it going to be extremely fun to run around dealing extra damage, having lots of adrenaline, having lots of hit chance, but having that increase of damage means in the early game, you're going to be in a way better spot to succeed. And in the late game, instead of being on a tier 100 weapon, you'll basically be on tier 130s. You'll be able to hit like an absolute bus, and the damage output should be completely and utterly ridiculous, to the point that I think your only concern really is going to be that 30k hit cap, because you're going to be up against it a whole lot. To me, Barbarism is an absolute S tier relic, and I think if you have any interest in being a meleeer, there is no better time. What an absolutely sick relic that does a ton. But next up, let's go look at Bombardment. Bombardment has the same first 3 effects as Barbarism, but in addition to this, it also does 2 things. The first thing it does is it gives you a 95% chance to save ammunition in combat. This was formerly 50%, but it was updated based on player feedback. This is really nice because upkeeping ammunition for ranging is extremely annoying, especially with the Elder God arrows. But the only other effect for ranging is that single target range attacks are also going to be cast on up to 9 additional enemies within 1 tile of the target. For those that are familiar with Chinchompas, this is basically permanent Chinchompas, and while this is really good for combat training and when you're actually leveling up your range stat, in PvM, this isn't terribly good, and I was pretty underwhelmed and disappointed seeing this because this does nothing to increase your damage output. There's nothing here that's like range attack critical strikes always generate adrenaline, or you know, something that actually gives you extra juice. So comparing that to the melee relic, this is significantly worse in my opinion. And although it is quite fun and it is quite interesting to be able to have permanent Chinchompas forever, and I could really see myself enjoying this relic, just in terms of raw power, this is very underwhelming compared to melee. And because of that, I'm going to throw Bombardment in either the bottom of the B or the top of the C tier. You know what? I'll throw it on the top of the C tier. I think the permanent chins is actually a really good start, but I was really disappointed seeing that there wasn't an additional effect on there. But what about the magic relic called Crit Happens? For this one, magical critical strike damage is increased by 50%, and then you also have a 95% chance to save runes in combat. I want to mention that this rune save is completely and utterly useless because you can already get infinite runes because shop stocks are infinite. What that means is all you need to do is go to the mage bank, go to the magic shop, and you can buy as many runes as you need. So this rune save, not terribly helpful whatsoever. But this critical strike damage buff is at very least interesting. It's interesting because everyone was expecting something called Crit Happens to give you more critical strikes so that more crits would happen. It's kind of in the name. But critical strike damage doesn't really work like that. The way that critical strike damage works is right here on screen, but it's actually innate, and you start with a base 10% and it goes up to 50% as you level. So if you pick Crit Happens, instead of getting 50% bonus damage on your crits, it'll be 100% bonus damage on your crits. So your crits aren't actually doing double damage, they're actually doing 25% more damage than they otherwise would. Because imagine a non-crit does 100% damage, a regular crit does 150%, and with Crit Happens, instead of being 150%, it's going to be 200% instead. So this is a significant boost to your damage output with Magic, and it should be pretty fun, and Magic also won't need to worry too much about hitting the hit cap with this, but the one thing that I'm really concerned about is Magic's major issue, and the thing that's actually really hard to get, is critical strike chance. It starts off at 10%, and it is really hard to get that up until you basically make it to the end of the late game. And once you're in the end of the late game, your critical strike chance will end up being somewhere in the ballpark of 30%. But let's be optimistic here, and let's say your critical strike chance was 40%. Even at a 40% crit chance, this is offering you significantly less damage than the melee relic is just innately by default at all points. So without any specific scenario or needing to be in the end game, melee just always does more damage than this. So even creating this exceptional, perfect circumstance for Magic to excel, where you've got the highest crit chance possible, this is still not that good. So for me, I'm actually pretty disappointed by the Crit Happens relic, and I think it would have been way more interesting if it made your critical strike chance increase by 50%. But beyond being underwhelmed by the power, as someone that is actually a mage main and usually plays it as his favorite combat style, I was pretty disappointed because nothing in here really changes the way that you're going to play or use the Magic ability kit. In the endgame with Magic, you already want to run a crit build and roll as many crits as you possibly can. So effectively, this doesn't really change anything about the way I would play the game, and I was extremely uninterested by any of these effects. To me, I'm going to open up my tier list, and I will be throwing Crit Happens in the D tier. I'm not putting it in F because F I'm reserving for the relics that I really truly think are like a complete and utter trap, and this really does come down to personal preference. If you really want to be a mage in this league, go ahead and pick Crit Happens, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. But for me, I found it extremely uninteresting and not very powerful at the same time. Nothing about this changes the way I play the game, and to me, that is why it is going at the bottom of the D tier. But last but not least, let's take a look at Soulborn. On top of the other benefits that work for all of the combat style relics, Soulborn is going to make Necromancy Spirits 25% larger and deal 25% more damage. The size doesn't matter, but 25% more damage actually does, because when you're less experienced at RuneScape, these conjures are going to be doing a significant amount of the damage for you. You're just going to have 4 conjures out that are constantly attacking, dealing damage to your enemies, and it kind of sets your baseline damage 25% higher than it otherwise would be. And that's one of the real big benefits to Necromancy as well. Just having those conjures out always doing something like 200,000 damage per minute, it's solid. It gives you a good baseline to work your way through bosses even if your rotation isn't perfect. But there's one more benefit to 25% more damage, being that the Necromancy Ghost actually heals you based on the amount of damage it deals. So if it hits 25% more, you're actually going to be getting 25% more HP healed as well, which is going to make it even harder for you to die, and it's also going to make it even less likely that you're going to need to eat food. On top of that, you get a 95% chance to save ectoplasm runes, which is actually really solid. Necromancy upkeep is actually fairly well balanced, and it's not nearly as bad as the other styles, but this is still really nice, and it'll mean that something like an hour of rune crafting might be good enough for your entire league. The last benefit is automatically unlocking everything from the Necromancy Well of Souls talent tree, and you get these talent points by using Necromancy in combat. So to me, this is not a terribly big deal because throughout the league, you're going to get your whole talent tree filled out very quickly regardless. But I also wanted to touch on the first 3 effects. This benefits Necromancy a lot because Necromancy is very much built around stacks. So I'll give you an example. Finger of Death is a very powerful ability. It does 300% damage, but it costs 60% adrenaline. The deal with it, though, is that you use necrosis stacks instead to reduce the adrenaline cost by 10% per stack. So a lot of the time in practice, what this means is you only use Finger of Death once you've got 6 necrosis stacks. Having a cooldown reduction means you can use Touch of Death more, which means you're going to have more necrosis stacks, which means you're going to be able to use Finger of Death more often. But on top of that, getting double the adrenaline from necromancy is also going to mean that there may be times that you could just use Finger of Death without worrying about that 60% adrenaline cost. A lot of the stronger necromancy abilities don't have cooldowns at all, but they do cost a lot of adrenaline to use. And because there aren't a lot of good ways to gain adrenaline with necromancy, this is going to be a really interesting buff that actually really genuinely changes the way you play. And I have a feeling playing with necromancy is going to feel extremely satisfying. You're always going to have enough adrenaline to use all of your tools and all of your strong abilities, and things like bloat that you're going to be able to have on 100% uptime. So for me, not only does this actually change the way that I would play the game, but it actually feels pretty powerful too, and it feels very catered to newer RuneScape players that may not have the best rotations. And for me, possibly fairly controversially, feel free to go at me in the comments, I'm actually going to throw Soulboard in the bottom of the A tier. I think it's a really, really solid relic and a very solid choice. This may not be a surprise to anyone considering I made my final choice in the last video I made on these combat relics, but for me, I'm going to be grabbing Barbarism just because I think it's going to be really fun to run around with melee and lifesteal, and I think it better suits my playstyle. But I think that Soulborn is a really, really good option, and I think that a lot of players are going to enjoy it. Next up, in Tier 6, we've got Banker's Note and Perkfection. Let's start by talking about Banker's Note. This is kind of a classic one from old school RuneScape that a lot of people absolutely love to pick. Let's talk about why and what it does. This gives you an invent item called the Banker's Note, and it grants access to your bank almost anywhere in the world. The Activate option will also allow you to note and unnote items in one action with a specified quantity. So if you had a bunch of food in your invent, you could click Activate on it to unnote that food. You can also use items on the Banker's Note to note and unnote items directly into your invent. This is a really interesting one because I understand why this is an instant pick in old school RuneScape, but I'm not quite as sold on it in RuneScape 3, and here's why. RuneScape 3 has an absolutely ridiculous amount of banks. Anywhere you are in the overworld, you don't really need to worry about having access to a bank because I'll give you an example. The place you're going to be doing a lot of your skilling is Fort Farin 3, and just on my world map right now, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, and if I move ever so slightly this way, 5 banks on my screen at this exact very second. There are a ridiculous amount of banks in this game, and I think for any kind of like skilling purposes of like skilling at a bank or having access to a bank wherever you are, you don't need to worry about it nearly as much. The other thing as well is that in RS3, you can already get an item called a Grace of the Elves, and what that's going to do is it's going to send items to the bank automatically that you're gathering when it's like resources. For things like mining or gathering skills or farm runs, you can already send those things to the bank. It does have charges, and you do need to upkeep those charges, but ultimately it's not a terribly difficult thing to do, and it's kind of a functionality that already exists. The two main uses though for Banker's Note are as follows. One, people have mentioned that this would be a really cool way to train runecrafting, because what you could do is you could go to the altar with a ton of pure essence, and then you could just unnote the pure essence and click on the altar to skip a lot of your runecrafting. This is really good for runecrafting XP and is a solid way to get through the skill, but I think it's ever so slightly overrated, because in Iron Man, the thing that's most difficult about runecrafting is not generally like the actual time you spend doing your runecrafting runs and actually running the Abyss. It's the time it takes to actually get pure essence, because you can't really mine it at a super high rate, and you also can't really get it at such a crazy rate from killing abyssal creatures. So because of that, even though you might think, wow, training runecrafting all the way up instantaneously once you've got enough essence is really sick, it is actually not quite as good as you might think, because you still need to spend all that time gathering essence. I do also want to mention that there is a quest you can complete that gives you access to an essence chest, and that will give you an amount of rune essence based on your runecrafting level, and that is a really solid way to get a head start on essence, but using the essence isn't the thing that takes the most time. So to me, it's decent for runecrafting, but it doesn't completely change everything for me. The other use, of course, that people bring up all the time is in a PvM scenario. Let's say you're trying to kill a boss and you run out of food. Well, Banker's Note is going to allow you to take out more food whenever you need it. And that is a functionality that I very much agree with, and I do think would be quite solid. Being able to guzzle as much food as you want is great, but unlike in a lot of other games where having high HP means you're likely not going to die, in RS3, all of the more modern and more recent bosses have things called instant kills, where you have to do mechanics right, and if you do them wrong, it doesn't matter if you have 10,000 sharks in your invent, you are still going to fail the kill. The other thing I want to mention about Banker's Note and eating food that can be a bit of a problem too is food in RS3 can be a little bit of a noob trap when you're PvMing. The reason I say that is a lot of food will cost your stats or cost you adrenaline. And on top of that, because Leagues is Iron Man mode, you may be better off trying to learn different ways of mitigating the damage you take, or even relying on things like the melee lifesteal or the necromancy ghost to avoid having to eat quite as much food. And in doing so, you're actually going to save yourself a ton of time because you won't need to spend nearly as much time gathering food either. In my opinion, even though Banker's Note seems like a good, safe option to a newer player, I actually don't think it's quite as good as people are rating it. And although there are some good uses to it, I'm going to throw it in the B tier. I think it's solid, but I don't think it's quite all that. But next up, let's talk about Perkfection. This is basically your cheat code to the invention skill, which is one of the harder skills in RuneScape to train, and also one of the harder skills in RuneScape to understand. To begin with, this is going to give you infinite invention materials, which, as an Iron Man, are the most time-consuming, annoying, frustrating thing to acquire of all time. Getting an infinite stack of invention materials is absolutely sick, as a lot of these materials quite literally will take hours to get even a single one of. Being able to access every material not only means you have access instantaneously to every kind of best in slot perk in the game, but it also means that you can make Essence of Finality amulets without having to complete clue scrolls for fortunate components, as those come only from clue scrolls. But beyond that, it also means that you can actually train invention to 120 or 200 mil by making high-level invention items at an invention workbench. This is something that was done the day invention came out as a means to very quickly train and get really high XP rates, but effectively, you get an amount of invention XP anything that you make on this invention interface. And some of the items here actually give a lot of XP. I'll give the example of the equipment separator, which gives you 9,000 XP every one you make, and it only costs components. So if you have infinite components, you can make an infinite amount of these, and you could nuke out 200 mil invention in probably less than an hour. But we're not even done yet. On top of this, augmented items and machines consume no divine charges. If you don't take Perkfection, you'll have to continually upkeep your divine charges, and the way that you'd go about doing this is by gathering energy at the energy rift. It isn't the most annoying time sink of all time, but basically every piece of gear that you augment up, which is very much recommended, is going to cost an amount of charges per hour, and it's one more thing you're going to have to be constantly thinking about and monitoring. Helpful perks are also going to trigger 10% more often, and invention machines are going to run twice as fast. And for those who don't know what invention machines are, if you head on over to the Invention Guild, invention machines are the whole back part of this room, and they do a number of different things, from automatically making unfinished potions, to automatically disassembling gear, to also automatically alchemizing anything that you would like to alch for GP. Having these run at double speed is really helpful, especially since you're also going to get infinite components and materials, so you'll be able to make all of these basically right off rip. The last really important boosts with Perkfection are when disassembling or alchemizing items manually, you're going to gain the resources from both actions. This seems kind of silly because the only reason you would disassemble something is to get materials, and you already have infinite materials, but basically what this is saying is that you'll be able to AFK alch things by disassembling them. And then on top of that, when disassembling or alchemizing items manually, have a 66% chance to save the resource. This is extremely good because it means if you get an alchable item that's worth 100,000 gold, you'll basically on average be able to extract 300k from that 100k item. So it's effectively triple gold at all times. And just to show you how AFK this is going to be, let me grab an item that I can disassemble. Let's grab these sailfish. Instead of having to alchemize them one at a time like you otherwise would in RS3, we are instead going to be able to as simply as click the disassemble button, and then every single time this happens, we are going to get GP, and a percentage of these items are going to be saved too. But that doesn't even cover the thing that makes Perkfection even more ridiculously overpowered. Because shop stocks in RuneScape 3 are going to be infinite for this league, what that means is you could buy an item from a shop with an alchable value, and then you could alch it for 3 times that value because of the chance to save it. Even something like a skill cape that costs 99k to buy will alch for 60k each. So if you were to buy a bunch of skill capes, what you'd effectively be doing is you'd be spending 99k for a skill cape, and then every skill cape you alched, you would on average get 180k for each, effectively doubling your money. To me, Perkfection is an instant pick, and it's going to be no surprise to anyone that I'm actually going to be throwing Perkfection in the middle of the S tier. As much as Banker's Note is solid, Perkfection is absolutely ridiculous, and this is one of the cleanest instant picks of them all. But we've got one more tier left, with Ascension, Specialist, and Everlasting Faith. Let's take a look at those now. For starters, let's take a look at Ascension because this is so ridiculously fun. This gives you a book called the Elder God Book that you can equip, and what it's going to do is it is basically the Omni God Book. It contains the effects of every single combat book in RuneScape. So from left to right, that's an Amasket book, a Wen book, a Jas book, a Full book, Erethror's Grimoire, an Armadil's Book of Law, a Bando's Book of War, a Guthix Book of Ballads, a Zamrock Book of I Can't Even Remember, a Saradomin book, and an Ancient book all at once. And that includes Erethror's Grimoire, which is a drop from Solak. I believe it was confirmed by a JMod that every single one of these books kind of has its own cooldown of 5 seconds. So basically, whenever you kill anything or attack anything, you're just going to be getting a bajillion Godbook procs all the time, constantly, as the 15-second cooldown that each book has been reduced to 4.8 seconds. And then on top of that, you also get a 5% chance to empower you with the Stone of Jas, which is going to make your combat stats 255 for 6 seconds. This might be the most fun relic of all time. It is absolutely awesome. I am just so stoked to see people running into boss fights and getting 5 different book procs at the exact same time. It is going to be a bit of a visual mess, but it is going to be so fun. You're going to have basically unlimited power. Overall, this is just ridiculously fun. To me, this is a really solid fun pick, and the other thing that's kind of underrated, I would say, about it is also the fact that you will not need to go and get these books yourself, and you will not need to upkeep them. In RuneScape 3, all of these books have their own distinct charge, and they need to be charged up with pages. So as an example, for best in slot, you generally want to run an Erethror's Grimoire, and you get 1 Grimoire page on average every time you kill Solak. So if you want to do 10 hours of PVMing, you'd need to go and kill Solak like 13 times. For someone that likes Solak, that's not a terrible thing to have to do. But for someone like me that wants to just kind of be able to get a book, put it on, and forget it, it's a nice thing that you will not need to worry about upkeeping. You can just turn this thing on whenever you want and have an absolute blast. The other thing about Ascension that's really nice is a lot of the damage these books do is percentage based and based on what you're doing. So the Jas book and the Full book are kind of storing and keeping track of what you're doing, what abilities you're using, and then you're getting amplified damage based on that. But all of the traditional God books, as well as the Amasket book and the Wen book, also just do innate damage based on what you have equipped. And because of this, it's also really good for newer players that may not have great rotations, because all of these God books are just going to be doing damage regardless. Even if you're not hitting the right abilities or the best abilities, you're going to be able to hit like a bus, and you're going to have all of these books constantly coming in and supplementing your lower damage output. So to me, if you're a less experienced RuneScape 3 player, this is not only an extremely fun pick, but it's also going to perform really well. And to me, I am throwing Ascension right into the S tier. I think it is so cool, it is such a unique idea, and I absolutely love it. But next up, let's look at Specialist. Specialist grants the Elder Essence of Finality Amulet, which allows you to select any special attack from a menu without needing the weapon itself. In RuneScape 3, Essence of Finality are the best in slot PVMing amulets, and the main thing they let you do is they let you store a special attack inside of them. It'll delete the weapon when you put it in, but then you'll be able to get that special attack, and it will scale up to whatever tier weapons you have equipped. So let's say you did this with Dragon Claws, you'd be able to use the Dragon Claw special attack Slice and Dice, and it would scale up to, let's say, the tier 95 or tier 100 weapons that you had equipped. So an Essence of Finality is great. You get this by completing Reaper assignments, as well as completing clue scrolls for 50 fortunate components, unless of course you take the Perkfectionist relic, in which case you won't even have to worry about the fortunate components. This Elder Essence of Finality basically is going to allow you to skip a lot of your progression, because as an example, instead of having to complete the entire Guthix Sleeps quest chain to get a pair of Dragon Claws, you could grab Specialist and then you could pull out your Dragon Claws immediately and have the single best special attack weapon in the entire game for melee. This does 2 other things that are really cool. The first one is that special attacks deal 50% more damage by default. And it's worth noting that especially when you're looking at both ranged and melee, both of these styles deal a ton of their damage basically entirely off of special attacks. I'll give you an example. This is the Ambassador Grandmaster Speed Killer achievement, and you're going to see here that after I attack the boss and I use one singular ability, which is Assault, that's a Dragon Claw special, followed by a Dragon Claw special, another Dragon Claw special, a 4th Dragon Claw special, a 5th Dragon Claw special, a 6th Dragon Claw special, and then after that, I'm going to be using some different abilities that are not special attacks to complete a skip. But I basically did 500,000 damage there in the live game, more or less just spamming Dragon Claws. So having 50% extra damage on all special attacks is going to be completely busted. This is consistent damage, and it is an absolute ton of damage. Specialist is going to be extremely fun as well, because I am not looking forward to doing the Guthix Sleeps questline during this league, just to get the special attack weapon that I want as someone that's picking the melee relic. That being said, Specialist does have some limitations. First off, if you're using Necromancy as your main combat style, you should not take this relic, because Necromancy does not get most of its damage from special attacks whatsoever. The other thing I want to mention is that every 15 seconds, your next special attack is going to consume no adrenaline. This benefits melee more than the other styles, because melee has the most special attack weapons, and some of them cost a ton of adrenaline. There are examples like the Sard Omen Sword special attack that is just going to hit a 60,000 any time you use it pretty much, but it usually costs 100% adrenaline. Using it for free seems pretty fun and pretty good. But you've also got things like the Dragon Battle Axe, which costs 100% adrenaline and gives you a damage buff for the next minute. The Dragon Battle Axe by itself is quite expensive. Dragon Battle Axe for free is going to be absolutely sick. The one other thing I want to mention about Specialists, though, is that if you're a less experienced player or more of a Revolution user, special attacks can only ever be fired manually. There's no way to queue up a special attack and have it run automatically, so that is definitely something to keep in mind if you're a little less experienced. But this is an extremely strong pick. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna do something unprecedented in this league. I am also going to put Specialist in the S tier. Not only is it extremely fun, but it's also a time save. But I will say, if you are using Necromancy, this would be going in the C tier. For the other styles, and especially ranged and melee, I think this is an S tier pick, and it's right up there with Ascension as something that is going to be extremely fun to use. But we've got one more pick, making the tier 7 decision making even harder. This is Everlasting Faith. Gain the ultimate blessing of the gods. For starters, prayer points no longer drain, but on top of that, protection prayers and deflect curses block plus 50% damage. This basically means you have permanent devotion, if you're familiar with RS3, or if you're an old school player, your prayers will then just be old school prayers. How it's going to work is they will block 100% of your incoming damage, because they already block 50% by default. On top of this, it says protection prayers and deflect curses act as soul split being active as well. Soul split is an overhead prayer that heals your character for a portion of the damage dealt. So basically, you're going to have infinite prayers, you're going to take no damage whenever you're praying correctly, and on top of that, you're going to have permanent lifesteal as well. Last but not least, if that wasn't enough, on death, you're also going to revive with 100% of your maximum life points with a 5-minute cooldown. So this seems perfectly well catered to learning new bosses. This is a really, really strong relic, but it's definitely catered to less experienced players. Players that want to just work on their prayer flicks, and as long as you can get your prayer flicks, you can basically complete any piece of content you'd like. I do want to mention, though, that there are a good amount of endgame bosses, especially when you go to the way harder ones, where you'll be getting attacked by multiple styles at once. So I wouldn't quite call this the take no damage ever relic, and especially for really high-end bosses like 4000% in Rage Telos, this is extremely powerful, and you're going to be able to avoid a lot of the damage you take. I do still want to mention, though, that RuneScape 3 has a lot of instant kills and also a lot of typeless attacks. If you look at a boss like Hard Mode Nikatra, most of the damage you take in this boss fight isn't really based on your prayers and the damage you take. It's all about hitting your movement. If you miss your movement at any of these points, you're going to take an 8k regardless of if you have this relic or not. So as much as I do think it is extremely helpful, and also giving you an extra life is extremely good too every 5 minutes, this isn't quite the cheat code that people are making it out to be. If you specifically want to or really like what this does, absolutely grab Everlasting Faith. I do not think it's a mistake whatsoever, and I'm going to throw it in the B tier. But to me, if you're a newer player, something that might help you take even less damage in a lot of instances would just be to take Ascension, and then that way you've got your God Book. Your God Book is doing a ton of damage for you, and you're killing your target even faster and taking less damage as a result. But for me, I'm in an extremely tough spot. I'm not even going to lie, I am so torn about what to pick. For starters, I don't think I'm going to be picking Everlasting Faith. As much as it is a good option, I don't think it's perfectly made for me, and I'm comfortable with every boss in RuneScape without needing to reduce my damage. I'm much more interested in Ascension or Specialist. This is an extremely tough one. And what it comes down to for me is I am going to be picking Melee. Melee is the combat style of choice, and the best essence of finality for Melee that is absolutely fundamental is Dragon Claws. Dragon Claws are only unlocked once you can kill Tormented Demons after the Welgothic Sleeps quest, which is like one of the worst quest chains in the entire game. I genuinely refuse to do it. I think it's going to be like 3 or 4 days of questing, and I just don't want to wait that time lock before I get to like go have fun. At the same time, I think Ascension is the most interesting and by far the most fun relic of the entire suite of relics so far. So, of every decision I've had to make so far, this one feels by far the most difficult. There kind of aren't really any wrong choices. But right now, I'm actually leaning towards picking Ascension, and then going through using less known special attack weapons for all of my meleeing. So as much as it would be great to have those dragon claws, I might take the Elder Godbook and see if we can get by with things like dragon halberds, dragon daggers, dragon maces, and other such random special attack weapons. That to me is my pick, although I will say this right now, there is a chance I change my mind, but it's going to be a game time decision that I'm going to make once I hit tier 7. If I happen to randomly be in a questing mood, maybe we send Specialist, but right now, my pick is Ascension. And there you have it. Those are all of my relic picks for Leagues Catalyst and why. And I hope this video helped you make your own decision and figure out which relics you want to take into the league. With that said, thank you all so much for watching the video. Let me know at any point if there's anything I said you agreed with or disagreed with. And of course, let me know your picks down below. Subscribe for more Leagues content, and I'll see you again very soon.